But first tonight, I can reveal there are discussions unfolding inside the Albanese government about whether Chris Bowen should step aside as Energy Minister to be replaced by star performer Andrew Charlton. It comes after Bowen was appointed the President of Negotiations for the COP31 summit to be held in Turkey next year. My confidential sources tell me this is all about timing, and neither Albanese nor Bowen are in a rush to make a decision about whether Bowen can maintain both roles at the same time. The timeline for this may be up to Bowen himself. Bowen's role as President of Negotiations was a concession from Turkey, which won the bid to host the climate summit over Australia. Bowen excitedly announced his role last week, as you'll recall.
It's also a significant concession for Turkey to agree that Australia would be the COP president for the purposes of the negotiations. Significant concessions are what's required when you are trying to find consensus.
Will Turkey also appoint a COP president for the rest of it?
So Turkey would be the COP president for the purposes of that. I would be the COP president for the purposes of the negotiations, working to ensure good outcomes.
But now there are serious questions about how he can do both roles, Climate Change Minister for Australia and the President of the COP31 negotiations. There are logistical and practical issues, as well as policy considerations. Logistically, Australia is a 20-plus hour flight from Turkey. Bowen holds a senior position, and it would be difficult to pay full attention to our energy prices and the energy rollout when he's in Turkey. Secondly, there are already major conflicts emerging between the interests of both roles. And this conflict was featured prominently on the front page of The Australian today, with a report that Bowen is signalling to Pacific allies that a transition away from fossil fuels will be central to his work as the world's new top emissions reduction negotiator, despite Albanese backing in gas use and coal exports at the G20. As he tries to balance his roles as a top cabinet minister back home and a COP diplomat, Bowen faces months of trying to appease nations, including the Pacific Island countries, who fear this year's COP didn't go far enough on fossil fuels. And the Oz reports that Bowen is also facing pressure from the mining lobby to hold the line on gas. And he must now also balance his own Prime Minister's strong support this weekend for the use of fossil fuel in our net zero strategy. So clearly, as COP president, Bowen will be pushing for the strongest transition away from fossil fuels. But in Australia, he still needs to rely on this for our own energy mix to keep the lights on. This is an undeniable conflict. The Prime Minister and his ministers are claiming publicly there's no problem.
Chris is a perfect candidate for that job. He looks after these issues in Australia, and now Australia, with Chris, has the opportunity to do that on the national stage.
This decision of the COP to have Minister Bowen to also have the position of being in charge of negotiations is something that I would have thought was pretty good.
Those are not conflicting objectives, because the global shift to net zero is a massive economic opportunity for our country, our economy, and for its people.
But these questions won't subside, and the opposition pressed on this today in question time.
Why isn't this part-time minister, full-time president, using this unprecedented influence to lower energy bills for Australians?
Why is the part-time energy minister, full-time president, globetrotting around the world seeking to broker global climate conference communiques instead of helping struggling Australians at home?
Prime Minister, why is the part-time energy minister, full-time president, more concerned with the next decade of COP negotiations than he is with the next decade of power bills for Australian households and businesses?
And Bowen's opposite number, Dan Tehan, says it's not sustainable when power prices continue to climb.
PM today was asked, will he deliver his $275 cut in electricity prices by the end of the year that he promised? And of course, he couldn't even answer that question. So what it shows clearly is that the government doesn't have its priorities right.
Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, he said that they're not competing objectives, reducing emissions and cutting power prices. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that they are competing objectives, and the government have showed quite clearly by trying to do both that they've failed. Energy affordability is our number one priority, and it's impossible to see that it can be Chris Bowen's when he's spending half his time around the world, doing the bidding of the United Nations.
So there is now a decision to be made about Chris Bowen stepping down from his ministry position. And these are the discussions unfolding inside the Albanese government. Former Labor State Secretary Cameron Milner, who's close to the Labor right, writes tonight in the Nightly that Bowen is now in the precarious position of being the president of a COP being held not in Adelaide, but half a world away. He writes already the rumour mill is running, with Andrew Charlton being briefed out as the likely Bowen replacement. And I'll get more inside detail on this with Milner, who's on the show shortly. But if this decision is made that Bowen should focus on his passion as a climate change global diplomat, then Andrew Charlton would be first in line for the new cabinet ministry. Charlton is considered the smartest figure in the Albanese government, and yet he doesn't have a cabinet ministry. He has deep government experience leading Australia's response to the global financial crisis under Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister, and he sold his startup Alpha Beta to Accenture for tens of millions of dollars 5 years ago. His firm, incidentally, did a lot of work on climate policy. Now, the media and Labor love to make fun of his property portfolio, worth some $40 million, but this just reflects his business success. He's also co-authored a book with Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, and he has a PhD in economics from Oxford. It's why he should have a leading role in the government, and the Prime Minister knows this. He thinks this. And so Albanese made Charlton Cabinet Secretary, so he could be in the Cabinet room, sitting in on the deliberations and decisions. It also sent the signal to the factional heavyweights that Charlton was next in line for a position. Now, Chris Bowen will not want to step down, and he'll likely be arguing that he can do both roles, and he may prevail in this quest. But the Prime Minister may be inclined to urge a change because he wants to give new opportunities to others. And it's a legitimate point that if Bowen is negotiating at COP31, he shouldn't be hamstrung by the Albanese government's own policies on coal and gas.